There are moments in your life where you realize, years later, that you were seconds away from disappearing forever. Not dying, not even knowing you were in danger. Just vanishing. Becoming a face on a missing persons poster, a cold case, a question mark that your family never gets answered. This is the story about the last time I hitchhiked, about the man who turned left instead of right, and about the split-second decision that saved my life, even though I didn't know I was in danger until it was almost too late. My name doesn't matter, not for this story. What matters is that I was 17 years old in the summer of 1998. We lived in a mid-sized city in the Pacific Northwest. Let's call it Riverside. The kind of place where everyone knows the main streets, where the mall is dying but still open, where teenagers have exactly 3 things to do on weekends: drive around, hang out at someone's house, or walk to the 7-Eleven. I didn't have a car. Neither did most of my friends. We were working-class kids. Our parents drove beaters that barely made it to work and back. A car of your own? That was a dream deferred until you could save up a few $1,000s and pray the transmission didn't die. So we walked. A lot. And sometimes, when the distance was too far, or the weather was too hot, or we were just tired of walking, we hitchhiked. I know how that sounds now. In 2024, the idea of a teenage girl sticking her thumb out on the side of the road feels insane, suicidal even. But in the late 90s, in our particular corner of the world, it was still sort of normal. Not common exactly, but not unheard of. My mom did it when she was young. Her friends did it. It was just what you did when you needed to get somewhere and didn't have a ride. Most of the time, nothing happened. Someone would pull over, usually an older lady, sometimes a young couple, occasionally a guy on his way to work, and they'd drive you 5 or 10 miles and drop you off, and that was it. Boring. Transactional. Safe enough. I'd done it maybe a dozen times by that summer. Never had a problem. Until I did. It was a Thursday afternoon, late August. School hadn't started yet, but you could feel autumn coming, that shift in the light, the way the shadows got longer earlier in the day. I'd been at my friend Melissa's house. We'd spent the afternoon doing nothing important, watching music videos on MTV, painting our nails, complaining about how boring Riverside was. Around 5 p.m., I told her I needed to head home. My mom was working a late shift at the hospital, but my younger sister would be home from day camp soon, and I was supposed to start dinner. Melissa's house was about 3 miles from mine. Not a terrible walk, but far enough that by the time I got home, I'd be sweaty and annoyed and my feet would hurt. So I decided to hitchhike. I walked to the main road, Chestnut Avenue, 6 lanes, decent traffic, and stuck my thumb out. 3 cars passed. Then a pickup truck slowed down. Older model Ford, dusty red. The kind of truck you see everywhere in working-class neighborhoods. The driver leaned over and rolled down the passenger window. I barely looked at him. That's the part I still can't believe. That's the part that makes me sick when I think about it. I didn't look at him, didn't assess, didn't get a read on his energy. I was thinking about what I was going to make for dinner, whether we had spaghetti sauce, whether my sister would complain if I made pasta again. Mundane, distracted, 17 years old and convinced nothing bad could happen to me. I opened the door and got in. The truck smelled like cigarettes and motor oil. The passenger seat had a rip in the vinyl. There was a fast food bag crumpled on the floor. The man was maybe in his 30s, Jeans, t-shirt, baseball cap pulled low, white guy, average build, stubble on his face like he hadn't shaved in a few days. Nothing memorable, nothing alarming. Which is the point, isn't it? Predators don't look like monsters. They look like everyone else. "Where are you headed?" he asked. His voice was flat, neutral, not friendly, not unfriendly, just asking. "Straight down Chestnut for about half a mile, then I'll get out at Riverside Park." The park was near my neighborhood. From there, it was a 5-minute walk home. "Sure," he said. "No problem." He pulled back onto Chestnut. I settled into the seat, looked out the window. Everything was fine for about 90 seconds. We passed the first intersection, then the second. The third intersection, Maple Street, was where he should have kept going straight, but he turned left. It wasn't a sudden turn, not aggressive or jarring, just a turn, like he'd decided on a different route. I looked at him. I said straight down Chestnut." He said, "I know, there's construction up ahead, easier to go around." I didn't remember hearing about construction, but I also didn't check the local news. Maybe there was construction. Maybe this was faster. He turned again, this time onto a smaller street. Industrial area, warehouses, fenced lots, very few cars. That's when the first spike of unease hit me. Not panic, not terror, just awareness. This isn't right. "Where are we going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Shortcut," he said. Still flat, still neutral. But his hands on the steering wheel had changed, gripping tighter, knuckles a little whiter. And he wasn't looking at me, staring straight ahead, jaw set. I glanced at the door handle, thought about opening it, jumping out. But we were moving. Not fast, maybe 25 miles per hour, but fast enough that jumping would hurt, maybe break something. And what if I was wrong? What if this really was just a shortcut and I was being paranoid? I didn't want to be dramatic, didn't want to be rude. So I stayed in the truck, and he kept driving. We'd been driving for maybe 4 minutes now, away from Chestnut Avenue, away from my neighborhood, deeper into the industrial zone. No pedestrians, no other cars, just empty lots and chain-link fences and buildings with broken windows. I tried to think, tried to plan. If I screamed, who would hear me? If I jumped out, could I run fast enough? If I fought, would I win? I was 5'4", maybe 110 pounds. He was a full-grown man. The math wasn't good. So I didn't scream, didn't jump, didn't fight. Instead, I watched, and I waited. And that's when I saw him. Up ahead, on the right side of the street, there was a kid, a teenager, maybe 18, 19 years old, wearing a baggy t-shirt and jeans, skateboard under his arm, walking along the sidewalk. The only other human being I'd seen since we turned off Chestnut. And suddenly, instinctively, I knew exactly what to do. I rolled down my window, stuck my head out, and I waved. Big, enthusiastic, the kind of wave you give someone you know. The kid looked up, confused. He didn't know me.
But I kept waving, smiling, waving harder. He lifted his hand, waved back, uncertain. I pulled my head back inside, laughed. A bright, performative laugh. "Oh my God," I said, looking at the driver. "That was my brother. He's going to be so annoying about this. He's going to ask me a million questions about who I was with." The man's face changed. It's hard to describe exactly how, but it was immediate, like someone had let the air out of him. The tension in his shoulders released, his grip on the steering wheel loosened, his jaw unclenched. He looked deflated, defeated, and I understood in that moment what I'd just done. I'd created a witness, someone who had seen me, seen him, seen us together. If something happened to me now, that kid could describe the truck, could point to this area, could place me here. I'd made myself traceable. And predators don't want traces. "Actually," I said, voice still light, still casual, "you can just drop me off up here. This is close enough." We were still in the industrial area, still far from my neighborhood, but I didn't care anymore. I just wanted out of that truck. "You sure?" he asked. But his voice had changed, too. Quieter. Less sure of itself. "Yeah, totally. Thanks for the ride." He pulled over. I opened the door before the truck had fully stopped. "Thanks," I said, and I got out. He didn't say anything, just drove away. I watched the truck disappear around a corner. Then I started walking, fast.
I should have called the police, should have reported the truck, the license plate, the man, the route he'd taken, but I didn't. Because what would I say? A man gave me a ride and drove a different route than I expected, but nothing actually happened. They'd ask, "Did he threaten you? Did he touch you? Did he hurt you?" And I'd have to say, "No, no, no." So what was the crime? What would they even do? I didn't have the license plate number, hadn't looked at it, barely looked at him. All I had was a vague description of a truck and a man who looked like 10,000 other men in Riverside. So I didn't call. I walked the 2 miles home, made spaghetti, told my sister dinner was ready, and I never told anyone what happened. Not for years. The next day, I woke up and everything was normal. Sun coming through my window, my sister arguing with our mom about what to wear, the smell of coffee brewing. Normal. Except I kept thinking about that truck, that turn, that industrial street. And I kept thinking, what if I hadn't waved? What if there hadn't been a teenager walking by? What if we'd driven another mile into an even more isolated area where there were no witnesses at all? What would have happened then? I didn't have an answer. Didn't want to think about it too hard. So I pushed it down, told myself I was being dramatic, that maybe it really had been a shortcut, that maybe I'd misread the situation. But I knew. Deep down, I knew.
3 years before this happened, a girl from Riverside disappeared. Her name was Sarah Hendricks, 16 years old. Last seen walking home from a friend's house. She'd been hitchhiking. A driver picked her up, and she was never seen again. They never found her body, never found the driver, never solved the case. Her face was on posters all over town for years. Missing, since March 1995. If you have any information. I remember seeing those posters. Remember my mom saying, "This is why you never get in a car with strangers." And I remember thinking, that won't happen to me. I'm careful. But careful doesn't matter when you're 17 and distracted and you don't bother to look at the driver before you get in. Careful doesn't matter when luck is the only thing standing between you and a missing persons report. I didn't think about that truck ride much after that summer. I went to college, got a job, moved to a different city, built a life. But every now and then, something would trigger the memory. A certain type of truck, a certain smell, a stretch of industrial road. And I'd remember. When I was 25, I did something I'd never done before. I searched for news articles about abductions in Riverside during the late 90s. I found 3. Sarah Hendricks, 1995, never found. Amy Delgado, 1997, body found in a warehouse district. Cause of death, strangulation. Jessica Torres, 1999, disappeared after last being seen getting into a red pickup truck. Never found. I stared at that last entry for a long time. Red pickup truck, 1999, 1 year after my ride. I don't know if that was the same truck, the same man, but I think about it. I think about it a lot.
After I found those articles, I couldn't stop searching. I looked up missing persons cases in the Pacific Northwest, abductions, unsolved murders, and I found a pattern. Between 1994 and 2001, there were at least 11 cases of young women disappearing after accepting rides from strangers. 11. Some of them were found, most weren't. The ones that were found showed signs of prolonged captivity, torture, things I won't describe here because they're too dark, too horrific. The common thread? They'd all been hitchhiking. And they'd all disappeared from industrial areas or isolated roads, places with no witnesses, places where you could scream and no one would hear. I started keeping a folder, articles, timelines, maps. I know how this sounds, obsessive, paranoid, but I couldn't stop thinking. I could have been number 12. In 2003, a man was arrested in Riverside for attempted kidnapping. His name was Michael Corrigan, 39 years old, worked in a warehouse, drove a red Ford pickup truck. He'd picked up a 22-year-old woman who was hitchhiking, drove her to an industrial area, pulled a knife, but she fought, broke his nose, jumped out of the truck while it was still moving. She got his license plate, called the police. They arrested him within hours. When they searched his property, they found disturbing things. Duct tape, zip ties, a mattress in a storage shed with restraints attached, and Polaroid photographs. Dozens of them. Women. Different women. Unconscious. Bound. The police tried to identify them. Some they could, most they couldn't. Michael Corrigan was convicted and sentenced to 30 years. But here's what haunts me. He wasn't arrested until 2003, which means between 1998, when I got into that truck, and 2003, he was still out there, still picking people up, still driving them to isolated places. I don't know if Michael Corrigan was the man who gave me a ride, but when I saw his mugshot in the newspaper, My hands started shaking because he looked familiar. Not definitely, not certainly, but familiar enough.
In 2015, I did something I never thought I'd do. I contacted a journalist who had covered the Michael Corrigan case. I told her about my experience, about the truck, the turn, the industrial area. She listened, took notes, asked questions. Then she said, "You should talk to the detective who worked his case." I didn't want to. What would be the point? It was 17 years ago. I hadn't reported it, had no evidence. But she insisted, so I did. The detective's name was Sandra Reyes. She was retired by then, but she agreed to meet me for coffee. I told her everything, every detail I could remember. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "The woman who escaped in 2003, she did exactly what you did. She waved at someone, created a witness, and he let her go." My throat tightened. "It's his pattern," she continued. "He picks women up, drives them somewhere isolated, but if he thinks someone saw him, someone who could identify him, he backs off, lets them go, waits for someone easier." "So I wasn't imagining it," I said quietly. "No," Detective Reyes said. "You were absolutely in danger, and you saved yourself." There's a question that keeps me awake some nights. What if that teenager hadn't been there? What if I'd turned my head 5 seconds later or 5 seconds earlier and missed seeing him? What if the street had been completely empty? Would I have thought of another way to save myself? Or would I be one of those names in a case file somewhere? One of those faces on a poster? I don't know. And that uncertainty, that razor-thin margin between survival and disappearance, is the thing I can't let go of. I think about the other women, the ones whose names I found in those articles. Did they try to wave? Did they try to create witnesses? Or did they freeze? Did they trust that nothing bad would happen, right up until it did? I think about Sarah Hendricks, 16 years old, just trying to get home. I think about Amy Delgado, found in a warehouse, strangled. I think about Jessica Torres, never found. I think about the women in those Polaroids, and I think that could have been me. Should have been me, statistically. But I got lucky. I saw a teenager. I waved. And that tiny split-second decision changed everything. Here's the part I don't talk about. I feel guilty. Not survivor's guilt exactly, but something close. Because I got away. I'm alive. I get to tell this story. And they don't. And sometimes I wonder if I had reported that truck, that man, that route, would it have made a difference? Could they have investigated, found him earlier, saved someone? I'll never know. And that not knowing sits in my chest like a stone. 2 years ago, I got a call from Detective Reyes. She was brief, professional.
Michael Corrigan died in prison last week. Heart attack. I thought you'd want to know. I thanked her, hung up, and I sat there, on my couch, in my safe apartment, with my safe life. And I didn't feel relief. I felt empty. Because his death didn't bring back the women he took, didn't answer the questions, didn't undo the fear. It just ended his story. But mine continues.
Last month, I was driving through a different city, different state, different life. And I saw a red pickup truck. Older model, dusty, just like the one from 1998. And for a split second, my hands tightened on the steering wheel. My breath caught. My body remembered. The truck drove past me. Different driver, younger guy, probably harmless. But that moment, that visceral bodily reaction, reminded me that trauma doesn't disappear just because time passes. It lives in you, in your nervous system, in the way you assess strangers, in the way you never, ever hitchhike again. If I could go back to that 17-year-old girl standing on Chestnut Avenue, thumb out, not paying attention, I'd tell her, look at the driver before you get in. Look at their face, their hands, their energy. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, it is. Create witnesses. Be loud. Be visible. Be remembered. Because survival sometimes comes down to the smallest things. A wave. A lie. A teenager on a skateboard. But I can't go back. I can only go forward and hope that by telling this story, someone else might recognize that moment, that wrong turn, that isolated road, that shift in energy, and save themselves. Because I got lucky, and not everyone does. I'm 43 years old now. I have a daughter. She's 15. And I've told her this story, every word of it, not to scare her, but to prepare her. Because the world is full of red pickup trucks, full of men who turn left instead of right, full of industrial streets with no witnesses. And sometimes, the only thing that saves you is a split-second decision you didn't even know you were making. I never hitchhiked again after that day. But I think about it. I think about the man who drove me toward those warehouses. I think about what he was planning. I think about the women who didn't get away. And I think about that teenager, the one I waved to, the one who waved back. I never got his name, never saw him again. But he saved my life, and he doesn't even know it.
If you've ever had a moment like this, where you realized later how close you came to disaster, you're not alone. If you have your own story of survival, of a split-second decision that saved you, share it in the comments. Your story might help someone else recognize danger. Subscribe for more long-form horror, real stories, real survival, real fear. And remember, trust your instincts. Create witnesses. Be loud. Because sometimes the smallest decision saves your life. Stay safe out there.